listening to Reckless Creatives, a Pipeline Artists original podcast, where Sadie Dean and Jeannie Villette-Bowerman share the candid truth about the challenges and benefits of living life as artists. Hey, Sadie Dean.
Hey, Jeannie.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, except I now want to just stop working and disappoint my husband by watching Say Nothing all by myself. No, that's not wrong, right?
Yeah, you can totally do that.
That's not grounds for divorce.
Absolutely not.
Hey, if he's going to watch football weekend, throw me a bone here. I got to watch the Say Nothing. But I do think he's really going to enjoy it.
It's so good. Let
me just stop for a second, getting ahead of myself, because you're going to hear the interview after we stop talking. So Sadie and I just got done talking to Josh Zetumer, and he is the showrunner and the head writer on a new show, an FX production called Say Nothing. And it's on Hulu. I think you can find that in Paramount Plus. I don't know, all these apps.
Disney Plus, not
Disney
Paramount,
Plus.
But close. The wrong plus.
There's a plus. Search your apps for plus. It's in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Josh adapted this book, and his writing team adapted this book, and it all takes place in the times of the IRA. And you know how much I love history, and you know how much Sadie loves binge watching. I like binge eating while I'm binge watching, but that's another story. Holidays are coming, but really excited that we talked to him, and super fun.
It's really remarkable what they're able to cover over, I want to say it's like 3 or 4 decades of just the new version, or what will be the new IRA and the troubles. And they talk about the disappeared and like just everything that happened in this short period of time. But it's also such a very long period of time. It's a lot, and it's done so well. Definitely worth the binge.
100%. And so for people who are listening to us who like history, or they want to know more about adaptation process and running a room and advice on show running and writing and all of that,
you are in for a treat, I think is what
just talking to you is a treat, Sadie.
Yeah,
talking to you is a treat.
Twice this week.
Truth be told, I think we could have talked to Josh for like 2 hours.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
I love talking to him. I felt like we're just like scratch the surface, but it also was really good. So stay tuned. Don't jump off, man. So Josh, we're really excited to have you here.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, I'm going to just start right off. I watched the first episode and I wanted to like run in the other, actually I did. I ran in the other room to my husband. I'm like, oh my God, you have to watch this.
That's very sweet.
Because we loved Peaky Blinders.
Mm-hmm.
And this has that same kind of feel. And literally the day before I watched it, I said, God, I really missed that show. And then this gift came. So I wanted to watch it with him before we talked to you, the whole thing, because if I watched the whole thing myself, I would ruin it for him. He'd get mad at me. And so I didn't think you'd want an argument with my spouse on your shoulders.
No, I'm glad we could save you from that.
Yeah.
And funnily, we had one of the directors as well as one of the editors from Peaky Blinders who worked on the series with us. Anthony Byrne, who directed episode 5 and episode 7, who is a really extraordinary director, very muscular director, the way in what he does with the camera and his approach to filmmaking. He was an incredible asset on the show. And then Paul Knight, who was an editor that kind of joined the project via Anthony, similarly had a real like pedal to the metal editing sense. So, Paul, who's just brilliant, I adore him. He's one of the reasons the show kind of like just almost just propels you through the history so quickly. Him and our other editor, Adele McDonald, who had worked on a series called The Great. They're remarkable artists, and they're a big part of the reason why the show works.
Incredible. How did you find this project? I know it was adapted from a book by Patrick Radden Keefe. How did you find it that spoke to you that said, oh my God, this is the thing I want to do? Because adaptation takes a long time, and especially something historical.
My first job in Hollywood was writing a movie about the IRA when I was about 26 years old. The movie never materialized, but it was going to be produced by David Benioff, who did Game of Thrones, and then Brad Simpson, who is one of our executive producers on Say Nothing. And so I was already kind of steeped in the history of the Troubles and the conflict in Northern Ireland from a pretty early age. And so Brad was the one who, many years later, 10, 15 years later, slipped me Say Nothing before it had come out and kind of garnered all of the praise that it would eventually accumulate. And, Brad very rightly identified it as a terrific piece of material, like very early. And I thought it was tremendous. And I also thought, to be honest, that there was like no way in hell it would ever get made. Just because Hollywood is so fear-based, and the idea of doing an ambitious period show set in Northern Ireland, the odds of getting it greenlit were maybe 5%. No matter how good the book was, I was cautious about doing it, but the book was so good, and Brad and Nina are such gifted producers, and especially gifted at taking like unpitchable series and turning them into and actually getting them made, that I signed up. So it was sort of a combination of just the incredible book and then the two of them.
Amazing. There's so much that you guys are doing here, just your whole creative team, and behind the scenes, in front of the camera. But in terms of like you as the writer and having this incredible writer's room, how did you break the series and then kind of map out that timeline, but also choose those like very historical pivotal moments that were important to you guys as storytelling devices, and especially for these characters and how they're progressing over decades?
The kind of guiding principle was, if we could narrow the aperture down on the characters, the more we could do that, the better. And so that meant if there were things that were sort of outside the character's immediate experience, even if they were seismic events in Irish history, we ended up, cutting some of them in service of telling like a very immediate emotional story. But that was not immediately obvious. There were plenty of things we tried to include, and then because of the sheer ambition of the scripts and the budget, it ultimately had to shrink a little bit. And there was a winnowing down process that happened, getting this 500-page book into 9 episodes. And just creatively, it started, Brad and Nina and Patrick and I, this is Brad and Nina Jacobson, and Brad Simpson and Nina Jacobson at Color Force, and Patrick Radden Keefe, the author. We got in a room, had a few initial meetings, and there was a whiteboard, because Brad loves a whiteboard. And we talked about our favorite parts of the book. We talked about what we wanted to include generally, and we talked about the themes. And it's really easy to sound pretentious when you're talking about theme. And I have a lot of respect for writers who just think that themes are kind of for college classes. But the book was so vast, you really had to start with sort of these kernels. And so we did the initial meetings, and then I went off and did a 16-week writer's room to really break the series. And, like with the majority of series, the writer's room is really where the story took shape. As far as any of us were concerned, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better writer's room. It was 4 people, and the specific tone of the show, the sort of balance of action and the dark humor and, and the pathos, it shares a lot of DNA with the book, but so much of that tone came from the alchemy of these 4 very distinct voices in that room. Just to shout, should I stop? I want to shout out the right. I want to shout
please,
out the right.
No, please do.
It's a long answer, but so our writers, I don't have enough good stuff to say about them. We had Joe Murdaugh, who is of Irish descent and raised in London, and created the show called Woman in the Wall, and was a showrunner in his own right. And Joe would sort of write this amazing action, and his dialogue is hysterically funny. His tonal sensibility is almost like it's almost informed by the Coen brothers, but it's also very distinctly his own. And then we had Claire Barron, who is a formidable New York playwright who's been nominated for a Pulitzer and just had so many insights into the sisters. And so, for instance, the idea of Sarah Jane, who appears in episode 2, this Protestant agent who's working for Frank Kitson and is kind of like a Duller's doppelganger who's trying to like hunt Dullers down. Like, that idea came from Claire Barron.
Oh,
And
cool.
she's a real person. She's based on a real person, but Claire was the one who was like, we should centralize this character, make the story more about women, and have it be like two women, facing off. And then we also had Kirsten Sheridan, who's the daughter of director Jim Sheridan. And Kirsten's been nominated for an Oscar for co-writing the film In America. And her writing is really earthy and humane. And, she has so much humanity and heart. She's also really funny and really good with subtext. And then we also had Patrick dropping in and out of the writer's room sort of intermittently talking about the history. We've really had this like murderer's row of very talented people all trying to wrangle this massive book. And the whole thing took place over Zoom. The whole room took place over Zoom during the pandemic. We had two people
Oh,
in
wow.
LA. Claire was in New York and Joe's in Madrid.
Wow. So like with the history part of it, I'm a big history buff writing historical fiction, but I've spent a lot of time in that space, like in the deep annals of the history, and you can get just drowning in it. Do you think it saved you research wise having Patrick that you could just refer to instead of having to do your own research on it? Or do you also do your own research, and were you worried about stepping away from history?
No, I did my own research. I mean, Patrick is invaluable. Patrick's an incredible collaborator and anyone would be lucky to have him. But, I did a profound amount of research outside the book in order to write the show, just because, you're, for one thing, as an American trying to write a series in a Belfast with Belfast dialogue, but not actually speaking in a Belfast accent, that in and of itself was this immense challenge, and then also incredibly exciting as well. So for me, it was reading every book that I could that was written about the Troubles.
Mhm.
The Jerry Adams alone has 3 or 4 biographies he's written and about 3 or 4 autobiographies. And then we also had all of the like a lot of the sort of primary source documents that Patrick used to write the book. So I had like old interviews with Dullers's father, right? Um,
Wow.
that we used, old articles in British newspapers that had come out when the sisters were arrested after the bombing of London. That you could use to help inform the show.
Those primary documents are like gold.
They are total, yeah, they're total gold. I mean, there's an interview with Dullers even that she did with I think a grad student, later in life, where she gets to tell her own story in her own words, and it's all transcribed. So the
Mm.
turns of phrase that she uses in the interview ended up in the show.
It's so fascinating just having that at your fingertips. And these characters, especially the sisters, what's so great about this is that Dolores is very like the protagonist antagonist at the same time. And we were having this conversation actually yesterday, Jean and I, was just like, there's so many shows out that it's all plot and not character, and you don't really care about characters anymore as much. But with this show, I'm just like, what is happening to them? I want to know what's happening to Brandon, what's happening, like Jerry, why is he so twisted and like so into himself and leaving his people behind? And then the sisters, and what's so lovely about that is just that turn for her at the end,
No
of just how
spoilers, no
yeah,
spoilers.
no spoilers, but just
Are we
how
not
protective.
spoiling? Are we not spoiling?
Well,
I
Well,
don't.
she
I
I
don't
don't
hasn't
know.
know.
finished it.
I don't
She
know.
hasn't
It's
finished it.
okay.
No,
But
spoil it for you. Okay, all right. I
yeah,
won't.
It's
Oh, wait,
okay.
yeah, cover your ears,
how
Jeannie.
far are
But
you? How far are you so I
Well,
know what not to say?
actually, no, it's fine. Because you know what? I have a terrible memory. I'll forget.
Okay, all right, fair.
but anyways, it's great that turn that she has of just, you kind of see her rise and fall in a way of just how protective she is of her younger sister. And you kind of get a glimpse of that in episode 6, where, she's like, we're going to do this hunger strike. And then she's like, shoot, I gotta save my sister above everything else. And then at the end too, you're like, there's a twist, and I won't spoil it for you, Jeannie, but you're just like, well, I guess she does have a heart in some weird dark way. And you feel really sad for all of them.
It's definitely. I mean, I don't want to spoil the ending. Truly, I do think that the goal was to show the cost of political violence for both for both the
Mm.
victims and the perpetrators. You may end the show. You can end the show any way you like emotionally. Like there are, I'm sure, people who end the show thinking, oh, these characters are monsters for what they've done, and probably people as well who you feel for them. And I think one of the things that we really tried to do is present the history as it happened and not tell you how to feel about the characters.
Mm.
I think that the fundamental discomfort that you feel that look, ideally you're feeling for Jerry Adams as well, because Jerry was part of the peace process in a major way. And ultimately, like one of the reasons why the conflict ended, right, was because of his actions. And at the same time, there's everything on the other side as well. All his actions as a that the show depicts as a member of the IRA that you have to contend with as well. So there's sort of a kind of a core discomfort that you should feel about all the characters at the end of the series. And we're also including the Jerry disclaimer at the end to make sure that people know that his perspective is very much that he was never a member of the IRA, and didn't participate in any of this. So we're want to make sure he's given his due in that regard.
When you did that first meeting, when you were talking about theme and all of that stuff, and then fast forward during those 16 weeks that you were writing you and your team were writing, was there anything that surprised you? Like any shift that you made that was like, okay, this is what we thought we were going to say, what we wanted to say, but this is what we ended up saying? Like, were there any shifts that were a little shocking?
Absolutely. There were a million shifts. I mean, over the course of that 16 weeks, the show changed shape multiple times, and then it changed shape again during production and again during the edit. So it was really constantly evolving. I think the thing that became apparent was the sort of balance and how much this would end up becoming Dullars and Marion's show. Ultimately, that's sort of like how much they ended up being the gravitational center, because the thing that was not apparent immediately and I think did come out more during the writers' room was the how much of the McConvilles we wanted to see in the story, and how much we would be able to see while also still being being honest and truthful to their story. And so the kind of the shift towards making Dullars the gravitational center of the show, I think, did really happen over the course of the room. Because of
Mm.
course you get this book and it's blue sky and there's so many terrific details. You really want to include everything. I mean, I would say the biggest shift probably was about the hunger strikes. There are three hunger strikes in the book. There is Dullars and Marion's hunger strike. Brendan also went on a hunger strike, and Bobby Sands very famously went on a hunger strike. Which is, if you know anything about the Troubles, that's sort of the one character, the one person that you know is Bobby Sands. And ultimately, it was a gradual process to figure out that if we depicted Dullars and Marion's hunger strike and we did it with uh, the intensity that we do and that we depicted in the show, for how visceral it is, and how it's as how uncomfortable it is. I think really you couldn't then have another hunger strike in the following episode, because people would probably not want to watch the show, to be honest. And also from a narrative standpoint, we tried many times to get Brendan's hunger strike in the series, because it was a real it was similarly it was a very visceral and traumatic event. And ultimately we had to cut it because of the sometimes the compromises you have to make when actually filming something, whether it's about money or focus or whatever it is. Ultimately we couldn't include it in the show, and that was not immediately clear.
I have the book on audio. I want to listen to it, but I can't decide whether I want to listen to it before I watch it or after, because I love seeing how things work. And like, I really want to dive into the choices you guys made, like in my own head internally as a fellow writer, like, what made you decide to use this or not use this, or, all of that. I think that's always such a great thing for other writers to do, is to read the books that the films were adapted from, so that you can really get a broader sense of storytelling choices and all of that.
I do think the audiobook is quite good. He got a very good actor to read it, so
Yes.
I highly recommend the audiobook. I feel like you're in now, though. You're in the show. I mean, if you want to start over, I feel like wait till you're done.
Yeah, I know. I can't. I'm like, those damn football games on the weekends. like turn off the football game. I want to watch the show.
That's funny. No, well, I do highly recommend. I highly recommend the book. It's my favorite book. So, I recommend it to anybody.
And I love that the narrator speaks with an Irish accent.
Oh yeah. No, he's great. He's great. He does a fabulous job and helps sort of get you in the tone of the book quite well.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, because I know this is your first time show running. Previously all your work has really been, movies, big action movies too. Just like the biggest learning curve takeaway you had on this show that you'll be applying to just how you approach your own work and just, any future shows that you'll be, hopefully running yourself.
I think being a showrunner taught me that you always have to know how to cut your scripts, because you will never have enough time and you will never have enough money. And knowing how to cut your stuff down to size to make it more producible is so key. Even if you don't tell the studio, just have the plan in your mind so that when they inevitably come to you and say, we can't afford this, when somebody comes to you, when your line producer comes to you and says, we can't afford this, you know what to do. And there's the difference between cutting that are sort of the cutting that writers like kind of enjoy doing, right? Which is like trimming dialogue within scenes, things like that. And then there's the sort of cutting and consolidation that is that's really painful. And you have to know what are the painful cuts you can make that won't totally ruin the episode. And you have to sort of approach that with an open heart, because truly, like, you don't know whether it's going to work until you see it in the edit in the first place. So this thing that you might think is absolutely precious, right? You'll get to the edit and realize you don't need, right? So you always have to have a plan. I can tell you one story that was kind of interesting, just about cuts and compromises. I think, one of the biggest, most challenging parts of the production was just sort of reconciling my really like outsized ambition for the series within our budget, because the show looks good, but we didn't have a ton of money. We just didn't. And the scripts were huge because I come from features. My scripts are really dense and very expensive. They were kind of like set piece after set piece. And ultimately the studio asked us to make cuts. When you're making those kind of compromises, like there are some cuts that can totally screw up your work. Mm-hmm. And then there are some times when the compromises can force you to do something that's really exciting, right? So for instance, in episode 2, which ends with Brendan Hughes being chased by the British, if you remember, mm-hmm. He jumps through the window and he cuts his wrist. The original ending of that episode, Brendan had his surgery on his wrist. And then there was another scene where he was like brought to a safe house, and Jerry Adams and Brendan Hughes realized that one of their men has talked to the British, and we couldn't afford another safe house. So at some point I just started coming up with wild ideas, like what if Brendan and Jerry realized somebody talked like while he's having the surgery? And that kind of super, it's like out of the Mission Impossible movie or something. That kind of like supercharged the ending, and that's what ended up on screen.
It's awesome.
And it works.
And it works, and it's better. It's better. It's not to say you shouldn't fight for what you believe in, because you absolutely should. And you really, and everyone who makes a show like this has to really fight very doggedly to protect what they think is good about the show. It's not to say you shouldn't always stand up for what you for like your vision, but at the same time there are compromises that can actually surprise you and make it even better.
Yeah, and there's something like very creatively like satisfying when you can pull that off to you're like, oh my God, we actually made this work.
Yeah. No, it's
Awesome.
amazing.
And that's where I always found, like, when we get a chance to talk to writers, those are usually where their favorite scenes come from, when they get some note that they really didn't want to take, and it's like, oh shit, I got to take this note. And then something amazing and magical comes out of it.
The funniest note I ever got working with a movie star was I'd written the script. Movie star really liked the script, and then there was a little pause and said, "But I can't." He said, "But I can't die at the end." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "I've died in my last three movies," and I just, I remember I was very young. I called my dad and just said, like, "You'll never believe this." I was so upset, because the note, it came from a very real place, right? For that actor, I understand giving the note, but it had more to do with the previous films than the story I was writing, and so, but then, I thought about it for a while, went home on it, went home, thought about it and said, okay, if I change like this, and this, these, three or four different things along the way, and then switch the ending so he doesn't die at the end, it actually made the movie so much better. And so it was remarkable that it was a reminder that you have to stay open and you have to be nimble. Otherwise, if you're too closed off and I'm an incredibly stubborn person, like really to the point where it does drive a lot of people crazy, but at the same time, like you have to be open.
Always, as Sadie and I say, know how to pivot.
Yeah.
I know your time is a little limited, but I want to ask, normally I ask people, if you were to go back in time, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? But for you, I would love to know what you would tell that 26-year-old who was writing that script about the IRA that never got made. Like if you could go back and talk to that version of you when you were working on that IRA project, like what kind of advice would you give yourself and give other writers too?
To that kid, I would be like, don't worry, like give it 15 years. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Don't jump off the roof. Just give it about 15 years and the story will be made. No, I don't know. I mean, the advice that I would give other writers, really just given our film culture, is try to write from the inside out. Go out and live and have life experiences and try to incorporate that into your writing as much as you can, even if you're writing a big superhero movie. I think we have a film culture, that sometimes feels a little backwards facing, where they grow up watching these great movies. They grow up watching Spielberg, whatever they watch, and they spend so much time in the dark room watching movies that when it comes time to write, really what you end up wanting to do is sort of like assemble all these great movies and great influences into something, that feels like you. The challenge about that is you're trying to do your version of a great film, it often feels a little bit like your version of a great film, right? Like, and the important thing I think to remember is really to just like, real people in your life will make the best inspiration. Even if you are writing historical figures, and certainly on this show, there were real people that I knew that informed the characters. If when we were thinking about the characters for this show, and we were thinking about Dullars, Marion, Brendan, and Jerry, the writers and I were thinking, okay, who are these people in high school? They're in your high school. Who are they? And they have when you think about them that way, they have like pretty clear identities. I won't go into what those are, but they at least in the writer's room, they were very clear. And that opened something up for us, I think, in a way that made them feel like we could get under the skin of the characters, in a real way, where they didn't just feel like these political mouthpieces. So really, it's about going out and living and trying to bring that experience back into your stories. That feels like the most important thing to me.
I just want to know which one of you went to school with bank robbers dressed as nuns.
You know what I mean. Obviously, it's a slippery slope, right? Because if you try to like quote unquote normalize, like if you say, oh yeah, like Dullars is like just the popular girl or something like that. You quickly will create a cardboard cutout. So it's really, we knew who the characters were. We had footage of Brendan Hughes talking about being in the IRA and telling his story in his own words, in documentaries. So we knew who these people were, but they're still like more like glimmers of, of real people that find their way in somehow.
Were you ever worried about family members of these people being like, that's not what my grandmother was like, or whatever?
Of course, yeah. I mean, usually you don't think about, you try not to think about the audience too much when writing, because that'll be that you usually just try to think of what kind of a story would I like to see, and then hope that other people like it too. But in this case, this was different. I mean, this was a politically sensitive story with real people, and we thought about the family members constantly, particularly with regard to the victims, and really tried to make sure that if there were moments that were sensitive, that we were staying as true to what happened as we could, as we possibly could, that we were treating the story as sensitively as we possibly could, which is part of the, that all that research is part of the reason that it took so long to bring the story to life. And then also that we weren't going to film it in an exploitative way. So there are tricks that filmmakers can use to sort of sensationalize events, right? To amp up the violence, whether that's with sound or music or slow-mo or certain camera angles and, big push-ins or whatever. And we really, I was very adamant, the producers were very adamant that we were not going to do those things, that we were going to try to deliver the story in a as matter-of-fact a way as we could. It didn't mean that the moments that were scary wouldn't be scary, but we weren't going to, go pushing things into an artificial space for the point of creating tension. And that was important as well. But more than that, it was just always trying to tell the story as sensitively and humanely as we could. And I think, when you see Laura Donnelly's performance as Helen McConville, I don't know if you've gotten to that part in the show yet. It's in the last couple episodes. But when you see her performance as Helen, I do think that her humanity really comes across, and Laura does such an excellent job of finding nuance and real pathos in that character, in telling that story. And so, I think we've tried to get it right, and we spent a very long time trying to get it right.
Well, and it shows.
Thanks.
I mean, I will say in closing to our lovely Reckless audience, when you decide to sit down to watch the first episode, that first scene, just warning you, you're going to be pulled right in, and you're not going to be able to get off of the couch. So get yourself comfortable, ready? Maybe some bourbon, just saying, and enjoy.
No, thanks. Well, it's lovely speaking with you both, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show and check out the book as well.
100%. I am so excited and so looking forward to it.
Yeah, the show's so good. I wish it wasn't a limited series. I wish there were more episodes. I need more, but I guess I'll just rewatch it again.
Yeah, well, you can always start over, or just leave your Hulu on, so it just keeps playing over and over again. Right. We'll take that too.
Okay, that's right. And Say Nothing is on right now on Hulu, so you do not need to wait at all. You can just go watch. Reckless Creatives is a Pipeline Artist original podcast. Like, subscribe, and follow us on social media at Pipeline Artists. And find more info at pipelineartists.com/listen. Until next time, stay reckless.